Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Sushan.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we are remaining in San Diego, and topics this week include outdoor lifestyle journalism, investigative journalism, doing the deepest of deep dives into a subject, what it's like being embedded with the United States military, and writing books. Our guest this week is Eric Blehm. He is an author and a journalist. He doesn't just write books. He writes extremely successful books. He has written not one, but two New York Times bestsellers. One is titled Fearless. Another is titled The Only Thing Worth Dying For. And now he's got a new book. It just came out. The title is The Darkest White, a mountain legend and the avalanche that took him. It is the story of Craig Kelly. We are proud to call Eric Blehm an alum. Eric, welcome to the Where You At podcast.
Josh, thanks for having me.
So this is super cool, the way that Eric and I connected. I think it was like 2 years ago. My cousin Grant sends me a text one day and he says, Josh, I just got finished reading this incredible book. And I looked at the author bio at the end, and the author went to San Diego State. He goes, have you ever heard of this guy, Eric Blehm? And I went, Eric Blehm, I don't think I know him. And I looked you up, Eric, probably on LinkedIn or on your website. And I realized, number one, we don't know each other. But number two, we went to San Diego State at the exact same time. And I went, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I don't know him, but I need to know him because this is awesome that Eric is writing these super successful books. And I can't wait to learn more about your story.
That's amazing. I didn't realize we went together as well at the same time. And you were in the journalism program?
Yeah, I was 91 to 96. I was on the 5-year plan, and I was focused more on radio, TV journalism, a lot of time at the Daily Aztec. And you, I believe, were there, 91 to 94?
I was on the 7-year plan.
Okay.
So I was actually a ski bum or a snowboard bum at first. I went to 1 year of Palomar College, and I was a transfer student. And then I took a year off to try and become a professional snowboarder back in the 80s. That turned into a year and a half, and ultimately circled back Palomar for 1 year. And I can't remember exactly when I transferred, but I kind of put my own way through. I had to work to get through college, and so 7 years. And I'm proud to say 7 years because it kind of helped me figure everything out.
No, that's a really good jumping off point about just being a ski bum, because some of the first things that you did as a journalist were Powder Magazine, Trans World Snowboarding Magazine. You later became the editor-in-chief. So maybe tell us how you went from snowboarding, wanting to become a professional, and then deciding, I want to write and do journalism that's involved with this sport that I love.
Yeah, it's kind of a circuitous route to how I got into what I wanted to do. But in a nutshell, my mom passed away when I was 17 from cancer when I was a junior in high school. And one of the last things she told me was, if there's anything you want to do in life, do it now, because you really don't know about tomorrow. And I mean, very, profound and, emotional for a kid. And literally, those were some of the last words that she ever spoke to me. And at that point in life, I wanted to be a professional snowboarder. Snowboarding was just coming on. Hardly anybody knew about it. Not all the ski areas allowed it. And I just wanted to do that. But I also knew I wanted to go to college. My oldest brother, John, was a successful pharmacist, went to USC. My parents were entrepreneurs, but we were always kind of behind the eight ball financially as a family. We literally never did the vacations that we would have liked to do. And so magazines became like my escape, both when I was in the hospital with my mom sitting by her side or just through life. National Geographic, we'd go on photo vacations to the places we we're going to go someday. And fast forward to when I was in Breckenridge, Colorado, where I moved to one of the first ski areas, big Western ski areas that allowed snowboarding that would have been the winter of 88, 89. I met a guy on a chairlift, and he started asking me all these questions because he saw my season pass, and more questions than the average tourist. Like, where is the best happy hour? Do you know how much that costs to get in the door? Where's the best burritos? Where's the best place to find powder 3 days after the storm? And I put it together, and he said he was writing an article for a newspaper I believe, I want to search this guy out someday because he was a big impact in my life. But I think it was Austin, Texas, but it was definitely Texas. And he said he was writing an article, and he said that the newspaper sent him there. They put him up in this schwanky hotel, which is called the Beaver Run Resort at the bottom of the slopes of Breckenridge. And I thought, what a scam. So you're here for 7 days. They give you your lift tickets. What a scam. Did you go to school for this? And then he said, oh yeah. And I'm like, well, what did you major in? And he said journalism. And that was when the light bulb went off. Another year later, I blew my knee out. And I realized that I, wasn't going to become a professional snowboarder, despite my efforts. I did get sponsored and compete for a year. Rode for Varney Sunglasses, Look Snowboards, Astro Deck, a few different brands, and Hobie Sports and Oceanside was what Surf Ride was called then, the surf shop. And anyways, I just decided, hey, this is my chance. I'm going to knuckle down and get my degree in journalism. And my goal was to write for a snowboarding magazine so I could go see the world on somebody else's dime. And that was the plan.
I love it. You got inspired on the chairlift by the dude just asking you questions for his article. This is fabulous.
Exactly.
I love it.
Right. And I'm telling you that my daughter actually told me, you have to write a book about this and try and find that person. It shouldn't be too hard. If you search for articles about Breckenridge in that era, maybe we could find him. And my daughter's a writer, but she said you could call it Finding My Inspiration. And I'm like, oh my God. So what a great title.
Your daughter sounds like quite the editor.
She is. Actually, my wife's an editor, for real. And so she makes me look good, on paper and in everything else in my life.
All right, so let's start to talk. I want to get into just a few details initially about your new book, The Darkest White, and then we're going to kind of rewind a little bit. But this is a massive undertaking, this type of book. So tell us, from the idea to write the book, basically like what year, to the process of the research, the writing, the additional research, the additional writing. How long does it take to put together a book of this scope from start to finish?
Well, I'll tell you, the guy that I wrote about, Craig Kelly, was kind of the Shaun White of the 80s and 90s in snowboarding. His name was synonymous with snowboarding. Nobody who was a snowboarder had not heard of Craig Kelly. And so he was kind of an inspiration to me when I wanted to become a pro. And then when I got in the magazines, he, of course, became the most interesting subject in that era of, the early 90s or mid 90s and definitely late 80s. So he was killed tragically in an avalanche in 2003. And it was a pretty controversial avalanche. It was, literally it was on, CNN, ABC, Fox. Everybody had a reporter there in the town of Revelstoke, BC, British Columbia, Canada. And I had already met Craig. I traveled with him. I went snowboarding with him in Iran, of all places. That's probably one of the most exotic places I was sent on assignment. And also just hanging out with him in the backcountry of BC, Canada, and around the United States. So when I heard that he passed away, that was kind of what got my the wheels turning, because I was invited to write his tribute stories for Transworld Snowboarding Magazine. And then I got a call from Couloir Magazine, which was the backcountry skiing magazine. They knew I had worked with Craig, and they asked me to write a feature. And so I did a lot of research right then. I went to his memorial service, and I was one of many people who stood and told stories about Craig. So that's really the beginning. Was here's this guy with his amazing story. He was a latchkey kid who wrote, from a divorced parents, who rose from, a kid who basically had to pay for half of his own BMX bike when he was 11 or 12 because his parents couldn't afford the other half. And his parents again got divorced, so he was a very independent latchkey kid. He was like the kids in ET, or just roaming the neighborhood on BMX bikes. So that's kind of the setup for Craig, who then becomes the four-time world champion snowboarder. And then he passed away, and I started my research right then and there. I recorded and videotaped all of the stories people told about him during his memorial service. And that was in February of 2003, just a couple of weeks after he passed away. And so fast forward all the way to 2018, And at this point, I'm, 50 years old at that point, and I have 3 kids, and I'm snowboarding with my son and some buddies at a little ski resort. And this person in the lift line next to me looks down and has a sticker that I'd kept on most of my boards all these years. And it said, Craig Kelly is my co-pilot. And this kid who was like in his 20s or so looks over and sees this on my board. And he just, with all sincerity, says, "Who's Craig Kelly?" And I was like, oh my God. I couldn't, I was floored. I was like, I wanted to slug him. It's seriously like, in my mind, nobody had not heard of Craig Kelly. And I realized it's a new generation and Craig's story was disappearing. So I went back home, I went to my storage unit and I opened the sliding door and dug back down to the very back where I found this cardboard box. And it just had in black, permanent marker, Craig. That was it. One word, Craig, underlined. And I pulled it out and that had all of the articles about him, the stories I'd written, the micro cassette recordings, the digital video recordings that I recorded everybody that spoke at his memorial service until the batteries ran out. Literally, it stops at a dead point and people were still talking from like 2 p.m. till 10 p.m. that night. And I had all this research, and the avalanche again was a pretty controversial avalanche. And so I had all of the newspaper articles about that. I had the coroner's report. I had an independent investigation because the family of one of the people who were killed with Craig, Craig was one of 7 people killed. The week after that, another avalanche occurred, 7 more people. So 14 people were killed, and it was deemed the deadliest fortnight in backcountry skiing and snowboarding history. So note to self, to anybody out there, if you get some good information, there's something there you might want to revisit someday, keep it. And I'm a hoarder of old bits and pieces of stories that maybe I'll write someday. And at the end of the day, Craig was a friend, and I wanted to share him and his spirit and his story with the whole world. And it was really from 2018 until just recently. It was 5 years of research, because once I opened it up, I talked to all the survivors from this avalanche, both guides who led these groups there in the mountains. I went to the location to finally pay my respects to Craig in person at the place where he died. And it's a ton of research, but I love it. Research to me is you're a detective and you're piecing things together. And in this case, it was kind of personal as well. So I had that going into it. And I think that answers your question.
Yeah, it really does. And I appreciate the thoughtful detail in there. One of the things that I think about when it comes to a book and research like this that you just described, and the word that came to my mind is patience, the amount of patience that is required. I worked for a daily newspaper for 10 years, and I'm not a patient person. I love that I get this piece of information and I'm able to write it up, and the next day it's in the newspaper. Now we can press publish and it's online. We can put it out on Twitter as soon as we get this information that we want to share with the world, that we're excited to share with the world. Tell me about your level of patience, your process of patience when getting this type of research, this information, and then putting it all together in a 5-year process that actually began 2 decades ago.
It's kind of a blessing and it's kind of a curse, I have to say, because it's, I probably over-research, and I probably have over-researched every book I've ever written. The last season was, at the end of the day, probably 7 years to write it. All of the average book is like 3 to 3.5 years of research for me to put out a nonfiction book. This one, from when I really started the process to write the proposal to completion, was 5 years. And including that, I broke my back during that period. So that set me back about 6 months, and COVID occurred, which stopped my ability to travel to Canada where I wanted to meet some people. So I had to do a lot of stuff, via telephone, where sometimes I like to do it face to face. So my level of patience is probably too good as far as, and that might be because the writing is the painful part. They say, who is it that said, was it, I don't know if it was Hemingway or Steinbeck, somebody said you beat your head on the keyboard and you bleed words. That's really kind of what it is. I love the research. The writing is more difficult, and maybe with a little ADHD thrown in there, that, rewriting the same sentence, 20 times and things like that. I'd go down rabbit holes for a bit of information, and I'm trying to get better about that. but at the same time, you never know what's going to come around the next corner. You know, you never know that next gem of a story that someone's going to tell you that fits a piece of the puzzle perfectly. This book, I really tried to outline it with my agent, Eric Lupfer, helped me really outline the story. He's the co-agent to Christy Fletcher, who I've been with for 20 plus years as well. They are amazing. So if you have these people who are professionals and have a heart for story, it's really helpful to have those, either in this case, I guess they would be my, colleagues in a way, or partners in this story. And also having all the people who want the story told, family members and friends and things like that. But then you get the people who are resistant and maybe they don't want to talk about it. There's one guy that said, "Nah, I don't want to talk about the Avalanche." And then a year later, he came back and said, "I read your book the last season and I realized who you are and what you're doing." And this was somebody that was involved in the Avalanche. So, there is something to be said for having that extra time, because things come out of the woodwork. People have time to think about, do I really want to talk to this guy? Where if somebody called them and said, "Hey, we have a deadline of Friday. You want to talk about this avalanche that you were in where all these people were killed and you were one of the people who helped uncover them," they might want a little bit more time. So again, it's a blessing and a curse. I have that patience because I know from experience that sometimes the best squeeze comes from the oldest fruit on the tree.
I'm glad you mentioned outlines. It was a topic that I wanted to bring up because I remember, I don't know if it was junior high or high school, and they're English teachers, and they'd say, "Okay, before you write this, whatever, how long it is, 2 pages or 3 pages, which seems like an eternity when you're at that age, have an outline." And I would always just say, "I don't want to deal with an outline. I just want to start typing. I just want to start writing." And then as I got older, and especially the first time that I wrote a book, I realized I need to have an outline. I need to go chapter by chapter, and I can change what's going to happen within these chapters. But the bigger the subject, the longer it is, the more I realize I have to do outlines. I have to do chapter by chapter. Give us your philosophy and how you outline and how you go about taking this massive book and making it a little bit smaller chapter by chapter.
Yeah, I'll say it starts with coffee. This is a this is a little recipe for my days at SDSU, like when something was due tomorrow or whatever. But to me, the secret to writing a good outline is strong coffee and peanut M&Ms for sure. I mean, that is the start. I have a little bit, little bowl of peanut M&Ms from the big share pack, and I cup of coffee, and I sit down and I try and think, okay, do I have a beginning? Do I have an end? And what do I really need to get there? What are the major points? And I will just bullet point it. I will bullet point the very basics. I don't get into the detail. If I start trying to expand those bullet points, that's when I get into trouble. But if you just kind of know at the beginning, at the onset of a story, ask yourself, I ask myself, what is it that made you want to write this story? Don't try and guess what the reader might want. What do you need to know? What did you know? What do you want to find out? Usually your early instinct is pretty spot on because you're, just like any book buyer out there, they don't know the story like you do. What is it that interests you is probably going to be interesting to other people as well. So as you move forward in the process, a lot of those things that might have seemed really interesting kind of become boring. Like, do I really need this? But then you have to remind yourself, wait a minute, the first time I heard about this story, this was interesting. So is it still interesting? Is it still something you need that's going to help, piggyback on top of each other to get to the next part of the book? The other thing I always try and think of is what's going to hook a reader, and then to think of cliffhangers of some sort at each chapter along the way, because you really do want to have a reason to keep the reader reading. And that's especially true nowadays. Short attention span, hook them at the front and keep them reading all the way through. And I think of that as I just do a very basic outline of the most important aspects of the story all the way through. In The Darkest White, it's really 3 books in one, because it's the biography of Craig Kelly. I wanted to work in the history of snowboarding, as he had his fingerprint in various aspects of that sport, the history of the sport. But it's also a disaster narrative. And so you have all these things, a history, a literal sport history, a biography, snow science about he was learning how to predict avalanches because he wanted to become a mountain guide. So there's that aspect. And then it's a crazy disaster narrative. Think like The Perfect Storm or, books like that. So you have all these elements that have to be introduced before you get to the end. And the best thing you can do is just kind of whittle that through and try and at least give yourself a beginning and the end, because that'll give you the bookends to the story. And once you have that figured out, then you can kind of actually just start researching and writing.
Are you the type that writes as you go along, as you research? Do you do all the research first and then start the writing? And I know this might vary from book to book, but what is your usual MO in terms of writing as you go along?
I definitely write as I go along. Absolutely, 100%. Because if you're doing your research and something comes to you that's just perfect, you're going to forget it. You can think in your mind, I'll never forget that. And then, you'll find yourself scratching your head for 5 weeks later, 2 months later saying, what was I thinking was so perfect? And you have no idea. So I think it's important, especially just for the little gem sentences. When I was with Craig's book, I was looking through my old 3-ring binder when I took a 7-day Avalanche course in Canada. And one of the instructors was explaining how snow falls and each storm represents a layer of the snowpack. And he had this quote, and I wrote it when I was at Transworld Snowboarding, and I had his name. It was Mark Ledwidge, and we called him, the nickname was the Warden because he was a park warden, and he did avalanche forecasting to keep the roads open in the provincial parks in Canada. And he just said, every storm tells a story if you dig deep enough. And I just thought it was so double meaning, because he was talking about we would dig down into the snow with shovels, and that's how you examine the layers of the snow. But it holds true for a story as well. And that became one of the first sentences in my proposal that hooked the editors at the various publishers. And I think that there was an auction for the book at the end of the day. And I think that something like 12 of editors wanted to speak to me personally. And that's huge, because you basically, if they want to speak to you, they want to make an offer on your book. And I think at the end of the day, that's how it works. So again, when something pops up that's special, write it. And if that whole paragraph for them, go with it. If you're feeling that flow, there's a reason for it. Go with it for a few, I think. Just don't go too far.
I want to compare and contrast some things that I did with some of my books and kind of see how our brains operate the same, and with the hopes that if anyone else who's listening to this wants to do a book or wants to do just some really lengthy magazine article, it'll help. So I know that when I would interview someone, I absolutely hate transcribing, and I always want to hire someone to do the transcribing or have artificial intelligence do the transcribing. But I feel like it's really important for me to listen back so that I can listen to my questions, so that I can evaluate myself, critique myself. Did I miss something? Did I not follow up on something? And so I'll transcribe it. And then once I'm done, a lot of times I'll just go and I'll cut and paste answers, and I'll go, ooh, this will work in chapter 3. This will work in chapter 9. And I'll kind of just like cut and paste some of those answers into those chapters, so that when I then do go back, I get to chapter, let's say it's 9, and I go, okay, this person told me this, this person told me this, this person told me this. And it helps my mind start to develop, okay, this is going to be the flow. These are the themes. These are these bullet points that you talked about. How do you do things similar? How do you do things differently once you've done the interviews and deciding where they're going to go?
Well, I will say that I definitely I record as many interviews as I can. Some people want things off the record, and that's when I'm sitting there with my notepad and scribbling away with chicken scratch that I can decipher later. I'll just use the darkest whitest example. I interviewed more than 100, almost 120 people over the course of 5 years, more than 300 hours of interview tape. So you can imagine, in this case, was the first time one of the early times where I paid to have it transcribed, and then I could evaluate it on paper, because otherwise it would have been a 6-year project if I hadn't done that. So I definitely but I do like to go back and look at myself. I mean, of course we all hate to hear our own voice, but I will, I think it's important to kind of open up to your subjects. And so oftentimes we'll banter back and forth, and I'll share stories of my own in my own life. And I think showing your vulnerability helps interviewee subject open up about their own. And I have no problem with that. I can be an open book in certain cases. And a lot of writers will this is me interviewing you. I'm not part of the story. And that's true. They're not part of the story. But if you want them to tell you your story, you have to develop a mutual trust. And I think that's important. But again, you hate listening to yourself. And there's times when my question will be 5 times longer than the answer. And you're like, you see like this paragraph of the transcript of me, and then like a one sentence, I'm like, oh, that's bad. Am I being a narcissist here and just like, covering myself? But no, at the end of the day, I mean, I've interviewed and covered a lot of very touchy subjects, and people open up to me. And so yeah, that process is really important. I, of course, take my own notes, but the basis for most everything are those transcripts. I mean, for me, nonfiction is nonfiction, and you want to get it right. And I'll circle back with somebody and have them re-explain things if maybe isn't clear or could be said better. I'll fix grammar maybe, but that's it. And not even that, because it really adds to a person's character if you're quoting them. If there's certain things that they say that might be grammatically incorrect. So one of the biggest things I've always tried to stress to younger writers, and when I speak to people at San Diego State or wherever that are interested in the writing craft and journalism, is you're going to find holes in your story. And sometimes, that's okay. I would rather have a hole in my story than fill it with bullshit. And there are people, nonfiction authors, I know specific examples, where they'll write something and they'll transition it with something that they've made up, literally. Pulitzer Prize winning author. I have an example of somebody when I was covering some special operations forces in the war in Afghanistan. And this guy that I was interviewing for my book on the same time in that war said, yeah, did you ever read this book? And insert blank that I'm not going to out the other author right here. And he said, well, there's a part in there where he had a conversation between me and this other guy. And that conversation never happened. I mean, it makes sense that it happened. And I told him that we had this conversation, but I never told him what the conversation was. But it was a bridge that was really needed in the story. And it was just like, for me, it was like finding out, about Santa Claus. It's like, are you kidding me? That didn't even happen. And he thought, no, I mean, it makes sense that would have happened. And what we said is kind of what we might have said, but it didn't happen. And so note to everybody out there, your job is to report and be true to the story, and, don't make shit up.
I want to ask you one more question about the writing process, at least for now. And then I want to get into more about being embedded with the military. You mentioned the word distraction earlier from the standpoint of the reader. It's really easy to get distracted. It's really easy to get distracted as a writer, whether it's one page, whether it is 5 pages, or whether it is a 500-page book. What are some of the tips that you do to stay focused so that you are not distracted by phones, by everything else that distracts us in the world these days?
Oh my God. If you've got the secret recipe for that, the anti-distraction app, I definitely can get distracted, and it's one of the biggest forms of procrastination, or whatever you want to call it. One of the biggest forms of writer's block, I don't remember where I read it, but somebody said too many ideas is writer's block, because you're writing something and all of a sudden you get an idea for something else and you're like, oh, that's great. So you'll do a little detour and start doing this thing. And that's the next, that's better. That's, greener on that side of the fence and what I'm working on right now. So yeah, really for me, what's helped it is that then this is the job for me as well. I have bills to pay. I get paid very sporadically. Like, you get paid upon signing, you get paid upon, acceptance of a manuscript, then you get paid when the book publishes, and then sometimes you'll even get paid another time a year after it publishes when it goes to paperback. And so those are paychecks for me spread out over years. And so if you need to pay the rent, you better stay focused or whatever, or your mortgage, whatever it is. So that's been helpful. But in general, I think that the distractions I've had, one of the biggest things I did is noise canceling headphones. And just try and set up a schedule when you're going to do those things that you want to do all day. Like if it's email, I will sit in there and say, you know what, I'll turn off the alert and I will check my email. If I know if there's no reason for me, there's nothing that's going on, in the next day, I will turn off my email and alert and say, I'll check it at 5:00 tonight. And anybody out there who knows me will know that's when I'm going to check my email. And I'd like to get into that sort of habit more so with texts and everything, honestly, because You can get sucked into a rabbit hole and you don't come out, and you get to the end of the day and you've done nothing. So I just think, whatever works for you, set parameters for when you can do other things, because inevitably the spur of the moment emergencies are going to come up, whatever it might be in your life. But if you can kind of coordinate where you let go of the things that you can control, make a schedule for that, which will give you time to focus on the project.
So you mentioned earlier about how you initially wanted to interview someone, they said no, and then a year later they said yes, based on your reputation, the number of books that you've written now. And so you've definitely established this level of credibility. But let's go back to the beginning of establishing your credibility. And I, in particular, I want to talk about working with an elite Army Ranger unit. Now, I'm going to cheat here and I'm going to read from Eric's LinkedIn, and then we'll kind of go from there. So in 1999, Eric became the first journalist to accompany and keep pace with an elite Army Ranger unit on a training mission. His access into the special operations community and reportage set an important milestone for American war journalism 2 years before reporters began to gain widespread embedded status with the U.S. military in the war against terrorism. And Eric's immersion with the Rangers is what led him to the previously untold story of an elite team of 11 Green Berets who operated in the hinterland of Taliban-held Afghanistan just weeks after 9/11. And this is what led to some of his books. I know, Eric, that you can't give away all of your secrets, but what can you tell us about gaining trust to gain this type of access to be able to tell these types of stories?
Again, I think it kind of leads on to, who has one thing to do with it. The way I was originally introduced to them was an assistant editor who was doing a story at Outside Magazine, who I had been, wrote freelance for, was doing a story on how military fabric, outerwear fabric, like today's, Gore-Tex and whatnot, how it differed than what they were using in the, World War II. Does the military have the best stuff? And as they were talking, I don't remember who it was, but as she was interviewing or working with this Army major who was actually a PR guy in the Army, he said, we've been toying with the idea of maybe having a reporter come and hang out, in one of these training missions, these crazy training missions that our Army Rangers take part in. Do you know anybody? Well, I knew her because she had just worked with a story on me, and she immediately thought of me and suggested it be me. And that's how I contacted them. And the first thing he wanted to do was see some of my work, what I'd written in the past, and he did, and it went from there. And so again, that credibility is really important to show them, and also timing, and also the ability to say, hey, someone's going to do this. I didn't even look at anything. I just said, yes, I'll do it. I'd love to do that without even looking on my calendar, because I'm not going to pass that up. So you have to be spontaneous. You have to jump on it when it's available. And who could lead you to your next greatest idea. And stuff doesn't come out of ether. It doesn't come out of the sky. Some people might think it comes out of the internet, but I still believe that your personal relationships can help lead to it, and staying in touch with people as well.
When you're on one of these training missions with them, how would you describe just the relationship, how you try to blend in, but also be at a point where they don't realize that you're there, or maybe they know that you're there, but they kind of forget that you're a reporter? What are the dynamics between you and these Army Rangers when you are with them?
Well, I mean, they know you, there's no way to blend in. You're an outsider. You are an outsider. I think that what you do is every situation is different. In that case, I went into this thing and I thought, first of all, the one thing when I found out I was going to do it, the first thing I started doing was I'm going to get in really good shape so I can keep up with these guys. Because it was like 36 hours nonstop hiking with like a couple hours sleep. I mean, at the end of it, I was worked. I did that. If you're going to be in a certain environment, you better be ready for it. You don't want to get there and be set up for failure. And I think being honest, people intuitively like to help people and understand things. And so you ask questions and be sincere. I think going in and trying to be a know-it-all is a big turnoff. You are an outsider. Nothing you're going to do is going to make you an insider unless you go through what they've done to get there. And you just show your curiosity and your genuine curiosity, which I have for almost everything. I want to learn about it. And I think that the people will respond to that curiosity. Because again, it's genuine. If it can be genuine, you're not there to expose anything. You're there to learn. And I think there's a thin line to walk between that exposing and learning. And I think if you can go about it as a learner, you'll be better off.
Before your next question, I want to interject something that Eric said I think is just really smart about don't try to pretend like you're one of them. And that goes across all levels. I've spent most of my life working in baseball. When someone tries to interject their little league baseball stories or even their high school baseball stories to a professional baseball player, everyone's eyes roll. And I'm sure it's the same way with musicians. I'm sure it's the same way with just about any line of interviewing. So do not try to pretend like you are more than you are when you're talking to somebody who is an elite in some type of field.
For sure.
Yeah. On the other hand, sometimes you're interviewing someone and you've got your recording device and you've got your paper and your pen and you're able to take these notes. I'm guessing that in these training missions, it is not like that at all. So how do you take mental notes and so that you can remember what you've experienced with them so that you can get it right later?
Luckily nowadays, that micro cassette recorder, I mean, even on that training mission, I had night vision goggles. It was dumping down rain for hours and hours, but I had a little waterproof recorder and I would do update throughout the trip or throughout this mission and just to take notes. So I always have that and I would just whisper it to myself, like, 2 a.m. still raining, so-and-so just turned on whatever. So then later on, I was able to, make a chronology of the event and cue me back to those moments. And then I did it right away afterwards. But yeah, and I will jump back on the whole thing. There is that credibility thing too, though. If you know the game versus you don't know the game, with snowboarding, I was a snowboarder, so I have that credibility. At least show that you've done your research. You don't go in and, you want to make sure that you do know the subject matter. And I think that helps a lot as well. I have a much better conversation with somebody, if they're a reviewer or a podcaster. I'm not putting you on the spot, but like if I'm talking about my actual book and you're speaking to somebody, it's awesome if they, actually read the book. And so in research, I think you can use that as well, because it's, you want to be able to cue off of some things that they say. So acting like you're one of them or pretending is far different than knowing at least what you think is going on in any given situation, for sure.
Let me talk about other interviews that you've done where if I were to go back to 7-year college plan Eric Blehm and say, hey, one day you're going to be interviewing this person at this location, and you probably would have never, ever thought it. Give me just some other interviews that you've done that you just go, wow, that was impressive. Or that was, just something that you're just really proud to have done.
The one that comes to mind is Hamid Karzai when I was researching The Only Thing Worth Dying For. This was a team of special forces soldiers, ODA 574, who went into southern Afghanistan in the weeks after 9/11 and teamed up with this little-known statesman at the time, Hamid Karzai, and their mission was to overthrow the Taliban from within. And he was a Pashtun tribes member, and it ended up that he got credibility, and the people in Afghanistan wanted to elect him in their own tribal way to become the interim leader and ultimately the president of Afghanistan. So after that happened, and I'm writing the book some 5, 6 years, 7 years later, I just had to talk to him. He was the guy that all these guys I spoke to, they were his military advisors. They were there to protect him, and I was actually going to go to Kabul. And it took me, I think I sent emails to his group, his own personal aide, for the course of like 2 years. And finally I was going to go to Kabul or Kabul, where he was, where the presidential palace was. And my wife was like, you're going to Afghanistan. This is when there's been bombings going on. There were, several attempts on his life, and you're going to go sit by this guy and talk to him. But he finally agreed because I gave him a letter that kind of gave a rundown of the guys that were with him. And he realized, oh, he's actually talking to these people. I should talk to him. And so I was ready to fly to Kabul like next week, let's say. And he said, I'm going to be in New York City speaking to the UN in 2 days. Can you meet me there? And so he scheduled me for 15 minutes, and I was sandwiched in a hotel room. I was sandwiched between Sarah Palin and Condoleezza Rice. And there's a Eric Blehm. And I'm like, that's pretty cool. It was during that presidential election cycle. And so Sarah Palin left. I didn't see her, but I went into the room. I had been metal detector, went through a strip search, everything. All my electronics were double checked. And as I started chatting with him inside, that 15 minutes that he slated was gone. And he kept waving off his people saying, no, we're going to keep talking. Eric knows this story better than any other journalist I've ever spoken to. He knows about the early days of the war in Afghanistan. And that having him say that to one of his aides, and he made Condoleezza Rice wait a half hour. I spoke to him for almost an hour, and he allowed me to do like 20 minutes of it totally on the record, and other stuff that was off the record was amazing as well, that I took notes. And yeah, the leader of a country, it didn't get any more exciting than that. And I will say, it was early morning, it was about 10 a.m. I went into the hotel where I was going to meet him. And the first thing I got there, they asked me to wait in the waiting area. They were going to come down and collect me. And I ordered a cocktail at 10 a.m. to calm the nerves a little.
I was just thinking myself how nervous I would be, and the idea of like how long it takes before you kind of start breathing normally again. And especially if you initially think I have 15 minutes, there's a different style of interviewing for 15 minutes compared to when it's an hour. You got to lead with your fastball. You got to make sure that you get quickly to the point without scaring away the subject by getting to the point too fast. So man, that is, I feel my heart racing as you just described all of that. That's super cool.
Well, I think what was really cool is I brought photos as well. And I had photos of these guys that taken snapshots on this mission that, they're personal ones. And in particular, what really impressed me about him is this was like, I don't remember how many years later after the fact that it would probably been like 7, 8 years later. I put this photo in front of him, and he sat there and started looking at me. He said, this is this guy's name. This is Dan. This man was killed. This man was killed. This man was killed. And he went like, such brave men. And then started giving me anecdotes about these special operations soldiers that were with him during the very early days. He wasn't in battle. He was back being protected in a town, but they were on the outskirts of town while this huge force of Taliban was coming to put down this village that had done an uprising in favor of Karzai. And when you start showing him some of that, that's when he just lit up. And that's when he told him, he said, I think he actually said, what did he say? He used one journalist, some big time TV journalist at the time. He said, this guy right here, Eric Blehm, he knows more than whoever. He said, he knows the story better than anybody. Why have I not heard of you? And, he was good. He was like talking to your uncle, that was there boosting you up. And, but he really knew everything. And he was so eloquent, such an orator, that he was just full of quotes.
You mentioned your wife a couple of times and how she is a book editor. Tell us more about her and you guys as a tandem, as a team working on things.
Yeah, well, she became a book editor because of me. Originally, she was an editor at Outside Magazine. That was who actually, by the way, was working on that story. She ultimately became my wife. Okay. We actually quit our jobs together and traveled around the world together. We had met at a journalist junket, really, in Sun Valley, Idaho. We got invited to ride Trek mountain bikes for a week, and she went for Outside Magazine. I went for Transworld Snowboarding. There was editors from like Playboy, Esquire, Maxim, whatever, Men's Fitness, and we all showed up and met, and we basically, fell in love and had a long distance relationship. And about a year into our relationship, she was actually doing research for round the world plane tickets, where if you buy a ticket, you can hop around as long as you stay in the same hemisphere or keep working your way around. She said, they're not that expensive. And she said, just out of the blue, we should quit our jobs and travel around the world. And I threw her for a loop because I said, all right, let's do it. And we did. We saved for a year. We put our lives in storage, sold our cars. And, here we are, 6 years later, and we have 3 kids. She edits. She did Patagonia catalogs for many, many years. She was like the lead editor for all of their catalogs She started working remotely long before COVID. She kind of created this position for herself, and then by default ended up being a book editor, helping me as well, and proofreading and things like that. So again, she makes me look good. When I turn something into my editor, there's been more than one editor at a major publisher who will say, man, for a writer, your stuff comes in really clean. And I'm like, yeah, it does. I always thank her in the acknowledgement, and I eventually always tell the editor, yeah, my wife's an editor, and yeah, she does. She makes me look good. Amazing editor.
We've bounced around on a number of different topics. I want to start to wrap things up here, but first, again, because we bounced around, what have I forgotten to ask you? What are other important things that you want other people to know, whether that's a student, whether that's another author, whoever might be listening to this, whether it's advice? I kind of want to just give you the floor here about other things that you find to be really important that I've forgotten to ask you.
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question for somebody that takes 5 years to write a book.
How about this? How about this way? If someone has never written a book, if someone has never written a book and they've got this great idea and they say, Eric, you've written a bunch of books. What do I need to know?
Wow. Again, my eyes roll back into my head. Trying to think of all there's so many. Well, I get that a lot, honestly. I'm actually considering writing a book about that, because a lot of people have come and I've always tried to give back. I've tried to mentor people, but you could mentor people and that could be your full-time job. And unfortunately, I still do have to sell books. But I think that the big thing is, and one that is probably even more so relevant to people now than when I started, but there's a lot of amazing stories out there. And this isn't to dissuade anyone, but they'll often say, they ask themselves, agents and editors as well. They honestly, what they say, it sounds a little gruff, but they're like, who cares? Mm-hmm. I've heard that somewhere. Who cares? Who cares? Like, do you want to, everybody, so many people have come and said, hey, I got an idea for a book. And then immediately that what they want to write about is themselves. They're going to write a memoir. That's what everybody thinks they have a story themselves. And I always say, everybody does have a story. But then if you want someone to publish it for you, you got to ask yourself, who's going to care about that? What makes it interesting? As an example, like I've had several people who have been like, amputees, traumatic brain injury, overcome horrible things in these wars, because there's so many people walking the streets that you see, with no legs or missing an arm or missing two arms and a leg. And these are amazing stories of comeback and resilience. And now they're doing something to help people here. And the editors will say, well, there's a dozen of those stories. What makes that unique? What's going to make someone go and dish out $30 for a hardcover book at a bookstore and buy that book? And it's a tough one, but there's always, of course, some of it's in the delivery and the writing. So you just have to ask yourself, why is this book important? Why should it become a book? And once you get on that, at that point, and that you've got an idea that's worth that, you can self-publish anything. And that's therapeutic as well. A lot of people will do that just for their own family. And I highly recommend that, honestly, because it's a good exercise. But yeah, just ask yourself, who cares? I know that's kind of a downer, but at the same time, people often ask me, God, there's so many books out there. Isn't it daunting? Like a friend of mine who's a writer as well, we went into a big bookstore and there's so many books everywhere. And he had said, yeah, this is crazy. Like, how are you going to make your book stand out? And I look at it honestly, and I say, how inspiring. Look at all these titles. My book's going to be on this shelf. And you have to have that calloused skin to realize what you're up against. But if you really want to and you can do it, I have dozens of examples, myself included, that you can do it. You just have to pick the right subject and, get ready for some hard knocks along the way.
I want to echo what Eric said about go to bookstores, go to libraries, get inspired, but also realize how many others have done it and the challenge of that, but also look to see who else has written something either about this subject or something similar, and jot down the names of those publishers. Maybe that publisher specializes in that. And so I think that is really important, that you understand both what you're up against, but also what the possibilities are. And then also ask yourself, okay, this is a great story, but is it a newspaper article? Is it a magazine article? Is it a blog post? Is it a podcast? Or is it really truly a book? And I would go back to outlining chapter by chapter, what really makes it a book. And in the process of outlining, even though I hated it when I was younger, that process can help you understand, is this really truly a book, or is this a magazine article, or different things like that. So wonderful advice, Eric, that I wanted to just kind of like add my own little follow-up to as well.
No, that's very, no, that's everything you just said is absolutely true. You can also sometimes find the person's literary agent by reading the acknowledgments and those things. And oftentimes another thing that I would say when reaching out to editors or anything at magazines, even, don't go straight to the editor. See who's the intern and send them a note. Hey, I really want to try and get in. Is there a senior editor there that might be interested in hearing my query or whatever? Go with that. They're like, what? Somebody wrote me? Versus the editor who's like, Jesus, I got another freaking email from somebody. So work your way in that way. That's a nice way to do it and show your interest. And if they're an intern or a low-level editor, they're not too far from where we're sitting. And if you come out and say, hey, I know you probably get a lot of these. Do you mind helping me out with any suggestions at all? And you never know what you might learn.
All right, as we wrap things up, let's circle back to the new book. Again, it's titled The Darkest White, A Mountain Legend and the Avalanche That Took Him. You've written 2 New York Times bestsellers, Eric. You've written, I think it's 5 books now. Is it still the same amount of joy and relief, or you tell me in your words what it's like when a book after all of these years is finally out now?
Oh, it's totally exciting. And when I finally turn it into the final draft and I've done all the work on it, honestly, it feels like I got out of prison. I'm so excited in that way to be done, because it's really hard for me to let go of a project. I always feel like I can improve upon it. And eventually when you get to that point inside where you're like, you're done, you're free, you've done the best you can, it's awesome. It's amazing. But to see the actual book show up at your door, unwrap it and see, I can't quite explain it. It's in nonfiction books. So my books often, all of them really include stories of people who have passed. And so it's their legacy. And I'm immediately excited to send it to the family members and things like that. So no, it's a huge, but you're putting your baby out to the world, and once a book is out there, it can be picked apart forever. And so you want to make sure it's as good as it could have been, but once it's done and you've made that decision, just let it go. Know that you've done the best you can. I'm excited. I mean, at this point right now, the public, I've had a lot of really great reviews, but the public hasn't had a chance to look at it yet. And so I'm like at that point where I'm very, very excited and anxious, because I put a lot of work into it. And I really want the whole world to know who Craig Kelly was, and to learn the truth behind the avalanche that took him and these 7 other people. And I poured my heart and soul into educating people about that and honoring him and, cementing his legacy in mountain culture. And I hope that the book does that.
Congratulations. I can't wait to read it. I started to read it. I can't wait to finish all of it. And thanks so much oh, wait, I almost forgot. We always brag about other SDSU alums. And so before we start to completely wrap things up, Eric, let's close by bragging about other people from San Diego State who have made us proud.
Oh, wow. I mean, there's obviously a lot. In my little niche area, not a whole lot, in like the adventure and action sports community. But I will say that there's this guy, his name was Kimball Taylor. Or Kim, and he approached me. He was an intern in I believe the journalism program, and he wrote me when I was an editor at Transworld Snowboarding, and just said, "Hey, do you have room for an internship?" Well, little did I know how great of a writer this guy was. And honestly, it was Kim Taylor, and at first I thought it was a girl. And so when he showed up at the interview, Kim, because he signed everything, Kim Taylor. I came out to the waiting room and I'm like, there's no girls here. And then so it was Kimball Taylor. And he ended up just going on and he wrote for the Surfer's Journal. And he's very, he's like, I don't know, he's very much an artist of words. I can't explain it any other way. He is so good with his writing and taking you into a story. And I believe you mentioned that he's teaching now, right?
Yep.
And so he's here at San Diego State. So he also wrote a book called The Coyote's Bicycle, which was about our border, which is very, current right now, and highly recommend that. So yeah, Kimball Taylor, shout out to Kimball, someone who made the effort, worked his way up the ranks at a magazine, stayed with it. I think he might have even gotten his MFA in writing or creative writing, maybe. So yeah, what a guy and what an amazing writer. Look him up. Some of the stories in the Surfer Journal are some of my favorite surfing stories of all time.
The alum that I'm going to brag about this week is John Shea. John is very near and dear to my heart because when I first started as a baseball beat writer, John also covered the same team. We both covered the Giants. I was covering for the Oakland Tribune. John was covering for the San Francisco Examiner. And John really helped me a lot. I learned a lot from him. He is still writing. He is with the San Francisco Chronicle these days. He is also a New York Times bestseller. His book about Willie Mays, it's titled 24. The number of the great Willie Mays became a New York Times bestseller a couple of years ago. He's also written a book about another Hall of Famer by the name of Rickey Henderson. John Shea started at the Daily Aztec. He is a phenomenal writer and reporter and a good friend, a great mentor to me. And so I want to give a shout out to John Shea for everything that he has done for me and for the journalism community.
I'm going to read his book, 24 Willie Mays. That's awesome. Amazing. Yeah, I would love to, get more involved. I did a lot of speaking for San Diego State in the, my minor was outdoor recreation. And so I would speak to an outdoor recreation class for like 20 years with Professor Larry Beck, Dr. Beck. And he would always say, he would bring me in because he thought it was a great way, the type of writing I did that combined my major with my minor, like outdoor recreation, all the outdoor things, sports and history that I've learned along with journalism. And it's cool to stay in touch, I think, with the people in your community and at SDSU. What a beautiful community.
All right, Eric, thanks so much for being generous with your time. Once again, congratulations on the latest book. You finally get to share it with the world. And it was so great getting to know you and your story about San Diego State and all your books.
Yeah, anybody that wants to reach out anytime, you can find me at my website, ericblehm.com. And I will do my best. And I always respond. Just be persistent. If I don't the first time, I will eventually. So follow up.
Once again, that is author, journalist Eric Blehm. My name is Josh Sushan. I'm your host. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next week on the Where You At podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you're at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms in person or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.